Good morning, everybody. Happy Thanksgiving to my Canadian comrades. I hope you all enjoyed your meals last night or tonight. Speaking of meals, speaking of eating a lot on Thanksgiving, today is a perfect topic to be talking about. I have with me Dr. Glenn Livingston. He's a psychologist and he's also an author of the book Never Binge Again, plus a bunch of other titles. I'll rattle them off at the end. And we're here to talk about binge eating. Hi, Glenn. Nice to see you.
Hey, nice to see you too. I'm happy to be here.
So last night we had our Thanksgiving dinner, and I have to tell you, I was full, but I kept eating the scalloped potatoes because they were so damn good, and I kept eating them. Now, in my mind, that's overeating, and we're going to talk about binge eating and when it becomes, I imagine, a health issue and a psychological problem. I want to differentiate between what is considered a problem, diagnosable in terms of eating disorders versus just other things happening for people in terms of not managing their mental health and contributing to overeating and stuff like that. So let's just start with the basics. What I did last night was overeating. That's not binge eating, right?
I'm sorry. There was some incoming call. I can't seem to turn it off.
Okay, so let me rephrase it. Okay, so last night, Thanksgiving, I kept eating. Okay?
I heard all that.
Scalloped potatoes. That's not binge eating.
Right. Well, I mean, there's a very specific set of criteria for binge eating disorder and the DSM-5, and it has to do with the frequency with which it happens. It has to do with the level of self-disgust or self-shaming, self-castigation that goes on afterwards. It has to do with the level of physical discomfort and whether there's a feeling of compulsion to repeat the behavior. You can look that up if you really want to. Just say DSM-5 binge eating disorder. I don't actually treat binge eating disorder. I discovered an unusual way to overcome my own binge eating problems, and it's not necessarily in concert with all the best practices, although it is in concert with the evidence about what's working. And I find it much more helpful to think about what you're describing as eating beyond your own best judgment. And most people do that on the holidays or when they're with family or at a meal, or once in a while they're in front of a Starbucks and there's this little voice in their head that says, that chocolate bar looks really good, and chocolate comes from a cocoa bean that grows on a plant. Yeah. It's a vegetable.
Well, the whole rationalization. Oh, these veggie tips are really veggies, so I'll just eat the whole bag.
Yeah. And I spent a lot of years, unfortunately, on the wrong side of the war, where I was helping the big food companies to take advantage of those rationalizations. And consumers really do.
Stop you for just a second, because now you're talking about your personal work. But when I was reading up on you, you also used to be obese. So you have some personal experience about what it's like to be using eating for other ways, coping, to make yourself feel better if you're stressed. What was your experience in terms of your own obesity and your own binge eating?
Well, when I was about 17, I discovered that if I worked out for 2-3 hours a day, I'm 6'4", I'm reasonably muscular. If I worked out for a few hours a day, I could eat whatever I wanted to. Boxes of munchkins or muffins or boxes of donuts or boxes of pizza, whatever you can imagine. If it wasn't nailed down, I probably ate it. And when I got a little older and I was married and I was driving 2 hours each way to go see patients and go to school, I just didn't have the time to work out like that. But I found that the food had a life of its own, and I just got fatter and fatter. I mean, I tried to do something about it. I went to all the best doctors. I'm from a family of 17 psychologists and psychotherapists, and
oh my God.
Yeah, everybody, when something breaks in the house, everybody knows how to ask it how it feels, but nobody knows how to fix it. So I went to all the best doctors, and I went to nutritionists and psychiatrists that took medication. I went to Everybody's Anonymous, and I would get thinner for a little while, and then I would get fatter and thinner and even fatter.
So let me ask you something though, Glenn, because you said that it started and it sounded like it was just a lifestyle change. But did you notice, because it's my assumption, and maybe I'm wrong, that binge eating and overeating is often connected to a lack of something that we're feeling inside, and so we're filling ourselves up with food? Is that inaccurate?
Well, It's accurate and it's not. And that's really the gist of my story. From a family psychologist, I tried to fill the hole in my heart, thinking that if I could figure out what the hole in my heart was, then I wouldn't have to keep trying to fill the hole in my stomach, right? I figured they were confused, and I went on this very soulful journey to figure that all out. I'll tell you that in the end, I realized I was missing a key component from that paradigm. It's difficult to love yourself thin. Yes, it's true that the energy is drawn from the nervous system when you overload your body with things that don't belong in there. And so when you're busy digesting, then your nervous system doesn't have the energy to conduct the emotions, so food can serve as an escape. And so people do associate this emotion or that emotion with binging, with going to escape. However, it triggers a desire. However, it's not the whole story, because the things that we're actually binging on are they're things that we didn't have in the tropics while we were evolving. They're concentrated forms of starch and sugar and fat and oil and excitotoxins. And another word for that is a drug. I mean, it's legal, so it's not a drug, but it's kind of like a drug, and we're actually getting high with food. Go on, I'm sorry.
It's so interesting you said that, because one of the questions I had written down for you, Glenn, was, is binge eating or any of these food-related problems, is it an addiction? And now you're comparing it to drugs. So I guess there's an addictive component to it?
There's a very addictive component, but I don't think that means that people are powerless over it. I don't think it means that they can't help themselves. I think it feels like that at the moment. And I think it's helpful to make the addictive comparison, because if people think that they're just eating for comfort, then they're more likely to keep doing it because they'll feel bad for themselves. And, you know, look, if you need a hug, I'll give you a hug, right? I'm a loving guy. I'm just a big teddy bear. But I think it's a mistake to focus on that. I'll tell you a story in a second that really illustrates that. I think that people are trying to get high with food. They're trying to get high with food. And if you make that paradigm shift, you'll be less likely to continue, because most people don't want to think of themselves as a drug addict. You know,
that's so interesting. So you're like playing on the psychology piece of as well to help people make that shift and that change, so that if they're having trouble using food for whatever, overeating, binge eating, and you start thinking of it as a problem, I can't control it, I'm addicted to this feeling, this process, that will help people make that shift. Well,
I mean, most of the research on addiction doesn't necessarily suggest that we can't make choices anyway. There's a lot of mythology in the culture that says that we're helpless over these addictive choices. It's not really true. But the place that there were three things that I recognized that made me shift the paradigm to find a solution. And I'll tell you in advance that the solution had to do more with becoming an alpha wolf and thinking of the voices in my head that were suggesting that I break my rules, or break my diet, or overeat, or whatever you want to call it. I started thinking of them as emanating from a lower organ, similar to how I would think about my bladder. Because my bladder, in the middle of a meeting, might say, "You really have to pee," but I'm not going to pee until the meeting's over because I'm in charge, right? Because I'm a member of society, and it's a very strong biological urge.
Interesting. Identifying the feeling, but delaying the release of that feeling. Whatever.
Yeah. I mean, you have to deal with it eventually, right? If you can't say I'm never going to pee again, because your bladder's going to tell you otherwise in a little bit, right? But
right.
But
so the three components were what?
Okay. So I talked about the work that I did in the corporations where I saw what big food was engineering. And it's not just the food industry, it's the advertising industry also.
Yeah.
5,000 to 7,000 messages about food beamed at us every year over the internet and the airwaves, and maybe a half dozen of them say eat more fruit and vegetables, right? So there's big advertising that makes you feel like you can't live without it. And then if you look at the neurology of what's going on, the the food-like substances that most people binge on, the concentrated forms of pleasure most people are binging on, they target the reptilian brain. If you think of the brain very roughly being made of three parts, there's the earliest part, or it doesn't matter if God put it there or it evolved. It's the most primitive part of the brain is the reptilian brain. And when the reptilian brain looks at something in the environment, it says, do I eat it? Do I mate with it? Or do I kill it? This is the part of the brain that addiction is targeted at. This is the part that generates the flight or flight response. This is the part of the brain that generates the feast or famine response. This is the part of the brain that gets activated when you're at Thanksgiving dinner and the scalloped potatoes are delicious, and it kind of overrides the upper parts of your brain that say, wait a minute, before you eat, mate, or kill that thing, what impact does that have on the people that I love? What impact does that have on my longer term goals and dreams and the person that I want to be around food, right? So I said, wait a minute, I'm trying to love myself out of this addiction, but the part of the brain that responds to addiction doesn't know love. So it's more like the upper part of the brain. So there's the mammalian brain, the limbic system that really is responsible for considering tribe and family and loved ones. So before you eat, mate, or kill this thing, what impact does this have on those that you love? And then there's the upper brain or neocortex, particularly the frontal lobe, which is kind of up here, that is responsible for inhibiting those urges and allowing you to delay in consideration of your longer term goals and dreams, like weight loss or sticking to a diet or anything like that.
Okay, so you're talking about obviously the internal structures of your brain and connecting that with the thought process behind binge eating. It's very, I was following along, but for just to break it down a bit more simply, how does that apply to us? Because I'm not going to be thinking in all of these scientific terms and the physiology.
No.
So how does that apply to me when I'm looking at food and I'm wanting to eat more? How does that apply to me?
So if you think that there are two parts of you, there's simplified to two parts. There's a lizard brain, and then there's you, right? The lizard brain is more like an organ that generates urges like your bladder does. And then there's you, you're in control. You're the alpha wolf. This is a lesser wolf in the pack challenging you for leadership. And so when you're online at Starbucks and you hear that voice that says chocolate comes from a plant and therefore it's a vegetable, and screw your diet, you can start tomorrow, or you worked out hard enough and you deserve a little bit. When you hear that voice that suggests that you don't listen, that you don't follow your diet, then what you need to do is assert control like the alpha wolf. If you think about what an alpha wolf does when it's challenged for leadership in the pack, it doesn't say, oh my goodness, I think someone needs a hug. It says, kind of snarls and growls and says, get back in line or I'll kill you.
Oh my God, 100%, Glenn. And as you're telling this story, I'm thinking of what it's like with us in our house with our dog. And that is the way our trainer has helped us take control of our dog. And he's very, very well behaved. And we have to assert power over him, and not in a mean way. We're not abusive or anything like that, but he definitely knows that we're in charge. And when he goes to do something to step out of line, like I want to buy that chocolate chip cookie, we look at him, we actually growl at him, we change our body position like, no,
yes.
You're not in charge, I am. And that's exactly what you're talking about. That's such an interesting way to look at it, like a pack mentality of animals. That to me makes a lot of sense, and it's so much easier than like the physiology explanation.
It really snapped things into place for me. And the mistake that most dog owners make is they love their dogs, and the dog steps out of line and they let him step out of line and they go, oh, isn't that cute? Or they'll pet him, God forbid. I had a 125-pound Doberman Pinscher, and if I continued to do that with my Doberman Pinscher, I was just not going to have a life. So I realized that I had to flip the paradigm entirely and look at these two pieces of myself. And I realized that there were all sorts of other biological urges, like my bladder or your reproductive organs will say, oh my God, that person's attractive. But you don't go run and kiss them in the street, right?
Well, not especially, yeah. I tend to hold back those.
I do too. There's a time and a place to approach people. I'm actually kind of shy about that myself anyway. But the point is this is not an unusual proposition. This is something we're doing every day anyway. It's just starting to understand that it's a normal biological urge, usually very often, not in the situation you were describing, but very frequently, there is a legitimate biological need behind it. So I was very addicted to chocolate. And at first I tried to just kind of white knuckle it and say, well, I'm in control, get back in your cage and, I'll feed you later. But then I realized that I had a legitimate need for some type of nutrition and some energy. And when I had the cravings for chocolate, I would make myself a smoothie of one sort or another. And I finally came to kale juice and bananas, which really worked best. And at first, I thought it was disgusting. I said, I want the chocolate, hand over the chocolate and nobody gets hurt. But I forced myself to have the juice anyway. And after about a month, I started craving the juice instead of the chocolate because there was this authentic biological need. It's kind of like when a smoker feels like they need a smoke or they're going to kill someone or they're going to die. What they really need is a very deep breath of oxygen, of cool, fresh air.
There's also like the exchange, the replacement aspect of what you're saying. We're already getting close to running out on time, actually, Glenn. So I don't want to go into all of your suggestions of things we can do.
Sure.
And we provide coaching so people can contact you. We've had a couple comments that I just want to bring up. Someone was saying he has impulse eating habits and it makes him feel bad. Can you just talk a bit about the shame that people feel towards themselves and the self-hatred and what we can do with that after we've had these moments where we've engaged in a self-destructive behavior, which I think binge eating is. What can we do with those feelings of shame?
Well, first of all, I think you need to recognize that there were probably no binge eaters in the tropics. So a good part of what's stimulating this is, fat cats in a white suit with a mustache laughing all the way to the bank when you're digging into the bottom of a bag of potato chips or whatever it is. So I think in part we need to turn some of that shame into anger and say there's something wrong with our society and the types of industry that it stimulates that allows these types of things to come in. Because there are billions of dollars spent to target your lizard brain and get you to forget and get you to have more and more and more. They're targeting your bliss point without giving you enough nutrition to feel satisfied. So you want more and more and more. So that's part of it.
You're saying that so part of that shame can be deflected back, saying to yourself, that there's an industry that has created the environment for this behavior as well. So not all of it belongs to me. And I guess now in terms of like this pack mentality is, so I'm going to be the alpha male, the head wolf of the gang, and target also that industry and say, no, I'm in charge, not you.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. But there's another part of it, which is that part of the perseveration on the shame and the guilt afterwards is actually your lizard brain trying to make you feel too weak to resist the next binge. It's actually the overactivity of that binge impulse in and of itself. And once people realize that, they seem to be able to let it go. Think about it this way. Shame and guilt are the psychological equivalents of the physical pain we might feel when we touch a hot stove. And if you touch a hot stove, you're supposed to feel that pain. If you don't feel that pain, you're not going to know where the stove is. You're not going to be able to avoid it in the future. However, what you're not supposed to do is say, oh my God, I'm a pathetic hot stove toucher. I might as well put my whole hand down on the stove. Right? That would be a pathological connection to the shame and the guilt. And when you understand that part of that connection is to enable more binging to occur, most people get mad and say, I'm not going to let that happen. It's very difficult to keep overeating if you refuse to yell at yourself. So think about the industry. You kind of put some of the blame back on the industry. Remind yourself that part of the purpose of the shame and the guilt of the excessive shame and guilt is to keep you binging. And then try to refocus yourself to collect evidence of success. Maybe you had 5 cupcakes instead of 15, right? Maybe the binge lasted for an hour instead of 5 hours. Maybe you had a whole pizza, but you didn't eat the box. But whatever it is, focus on evidence of success. If you ask, how can I stop overeating? your brain will start to collect evidence that you can stop overeating. If you ask, oh my God, why can't I stop? What's wrong with me? Your brain will start to collect evidence about why you can't stop and what's wrong with you. The question that you ask at that point really determines the identity you develop and what direction you take.
I like that. Those are three really interesting things. Deflect it back to the industry. One, acknowledge that the reaction, the self-hatred, the shame that you're feeling is part of your primitive responses that were there for some valid reasons way back when. They don't belong in this situation. So go ahead and let it go, and then look at the evidence of the things that you have done in a positive way, the self-control you have exhibited. That's a nice reframe, and it kind of, I guess, would get you out of that shame cycle.
Yeah.
Which could make things worse. So yeah. Glenn, I know that you provide some online coaching as well. So what kinds of clients, for people who are watching this now, who is it that with whom you could work and who you could help? Because you don't necessarily have to be overweight or obese to be able to benefit from your coaching, I'm sure, because binge eating doesn't necessarily equate with weight either.
If you find that you're eating beyond your own best judgment and you like to have the ability to get more control over that, that's the kind of people that we work with. But rather than thinking about hiring us for coaching or anything up front, I'd like people to have a free copy of the book if they're interested, and then they can tell whether this style is for them or not. It's called Never Binge Again. You can get it at neverbingeagain.com. And I make it available for free in the Kindle, Nook, and PDF format. If you want the traditional paperback formats or something, you can buy them directly. And when you click the big red button and sign up for the reader bonuses, you'll get that. You'll get some recorded coaching sessions for free so that you can see what the style is and whether it matches up to you. And a free set of food plan starter templates. You can use this with any dietary philosophy, high carb, low carb, ketogenic, macrobiotic, point counters, calorie counters. So we got you a set of food plan starter templates. It's all at neverbingeagain.com. Click the big red button and see if it makes sense to you. And there's ways to contact me thereafter if you want to.
That's amazing. And if you need to contact Glenn and you couldn't find him or his link, which I'll make sure to put up as soon as this feed is over, I'll put up his link. You can always direct message me through Facebook, and I'd be happy to connect you and send you to his website. Thank you so much, Glenn, for being a guest. I really appreciate it. And I blame the food industry for me overeating those stuff.
Well, and then take control. Then you take control.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's great. Thanks a lot, Glenn. I appreciate your time. Have a great afternoon.
Namaste. I'll see you then. Okay.
Bye-bye.